Drop the tool! Step away from the house! Now!
Officer, I'm a homeowner on my own property. Those are gardening shears.
Hands up or you're getting tased! Don't test me!
You're escalating without cause. This is unlawful. Call your supervisor right now.
Turn around, you're being detained!
Officer Kyle Miller, 24 years old and just 6 months out of the academy, had absolutely no idea that the man he was approaching, hand hovering near his holster, had spent 32 years wearing a badge, 12 of them, as the chief of police for the very department Miller now served. The man standing amidst the prize-winning hybrid tea roses wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was Elias Thorne, a 68-year-old Marine Corps veteran and the retired chief of police who had rewritten the city's use of force policy. Elias had commanded task forces that took down organized crime syndicates. He had stared down armed bank robbers and negotiated hostage situations. And now he was about to become the subject of an arrest that would expose a rot within the department he once led. Before we unravel the layers of this infuriating yet vindicating story, I need you to take a second. Scroll down right now and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your state, your country. And if you believe that experience and respect should mean something, hit that subscribe button. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. Elias Thorne was not a man who flaunted his past. At nearly 70, he kept fit, his posture still holding the rigid discipline of a Marine. He was known in his quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood as the man with the best garden on the block. That Tuesday afternoon, Elias was doing what he did every Tuesday, pruning. He was dressed in a worn-out navy blue polo shirt, khaki work pants, and thick gardening gloves. He held a pair of professional-grade bypass loppers. He was on his own property, deeply engrossed in his work. The patrol car rolled slowly down the street. Officer Kyle Miller was on proactive patrol in a neighborhood that had reported a string of porch pirate package thefts 2 weeks prior. The suspect description for those thefts had been vague. A male in dark clothing. That was it. No height, no weight, no distinct features. Just a silhouette. Miller saw Elias near the front porch. He saw a black man in a blue shirt holding a metal tool. In Miller's inexperienced and biased assessment, this wasn't a homeowner landscaping. This was a suspect attempting to pry open a window or break into a garage. Miller didn't run the license plate of the truck in the driveway, a truck that had a Marine veteran bumper sticker and a Fraternal Order of Police emblem. He didn't observe for a few minutes to see if the behavior was actually criminal. He just acted. Miller slammed the cruiser into park, blocking part of the driveway. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, his adrenaline already spiking for no reason. Elias didn't hear the car immediately. He was focused on a particularly stubborn branch of a Mr. Lincoln red rose. "Hey, you drop it?" The shout broke the suburban silence. Elias paused. He didn't jump. He didn't drop the expensive loppers. He simply turned his head, looking over his shoulder with the calm, analytical gaze that had unsettled suspects for 3 decades. He saw a young officer, barely a kid in his eyes, standing on the sidewalk with his hand resting aggressively on the grip of his service pistol. "I said drop the weapon and step away from the house," Miller yelled, his voice cracking slightly. Elias turned fully around, keeping the shears in his right hand but lowering them to his side. He didn't advance. He stood his ground, his feet planted on the grass he had watered that morning. He looked at the officer's nameplate. Miller. He didn't recognize the name. A rookie making a very bad assumption. "Officer," Elias said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that carried without shouting. "I suggest you take a deep breath and look at what I'm holding. These are gardening shears, and I live here." Most people, when confronted by a police officer screaming commands, panic. They drop whatever they are holding. They raise their hands. They stammer. Elias Thorne did none of that. His pulse didn't even quicken. He analyzed the threat assessment instantly. The officer was young, nervous, and operating on a cognitive bias that blinded him to the obvious reality. The weapon was a gardening tool. The break-in was maintenance. "I'm not asking you again," Miller shouted, stepping off the sidewalk and onto the grass. He had crossed the property line. "Drop the weapon now, or I will deploy my taser." Elias frowned. The escalation was completely unjustified. There was no imminent threat. "Son, if you deploy a taser on a homeowner standing in his own front yard holding gardening tools, you're going to end your career before it barely starts. I am not dropping my property into the dirt. I am placing it on this bench." Slowly, with deliberate movements that broadcasted no threat, Elias placed the loppers on a stone garden bench next to him. He then removed his heavy gardening gloves, placing them beside the shears. He held his bare hands out, palms open waist level. "Satisfied?" Elias asked. Miller didn't de-escalate. He felt his authority was being challenged. The adrenaline of the bust was clouding his judgment. He marched up the driveway, closing the distance to less than 10 feet. "Turn around and face away from me," Miller commanded. "I need to see some ID." "On what grounds?" Elias asked. He didn't turn around. He looked Miller directly in the eye. "I'm investigating a suspicious person report. You match the description." "What description?" Elias pressed. "Specifically, be articulate, officer. What specific articulable facts lead you to believe that I, a 68-year-old man pruning roses in broad daylight, am involved in criminal activity?" Miller blinked. He wasn't used to suspects using words like articulable facts. He wasn't used to being questioned. "We have reports of burglaries in this area. You're standing near the windows with a pry tool." "It's a pair of bypass loppers, officer, and I'm standing in my own garden. This is my curtilage. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause that a crime is being committed right now, you are trespassing. I am not required to show you identification on my own private property without reasonable suspicion of a crime." "You're obstructing an investigation." Miller snapped his hand, unclipping the retention strap of his holster. "I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." Elias corrected him, his voice hardening. "There is a significant difference. You are making a Terry stop on private property without the requisite level of suspicion. I strongly suggest you call your supervisor." By now, the commotion had drawn attention. 2 houses down, Mrs. Gable, a retired school teacher, had come out onto her porch. Across the street, a young man named Marcus was washing his car. Seeing the confrontation, Marcus pulled out his smartphone. He didn't say anything, he just hit record. Miller noticed the audience. He felt the pressure. If he backed down now, he looked weak. If he left, he was letting a suspect dictate the encounter. He doubled down on his mistake. "I don't need a supervisor to identify a suspect," Miller said, moving into Elias's personal space. "You're refusing to identify yourself. In this state, failure to identify during a lawful detention is an arrestable offense." "The detention must be lawful first," Elias said quietly. "This is not lawful. I have told you I live here. My truck is right there. Run the plate. It comes back to Elias Thorne. That is me. Verify the information before you put hands on me." "I'm done arguing," Miller said. He reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around. Now." The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the sharp, jagged breathing of Officer Miller. Elias Thorne stood perfectly still. He knew exactly what was happening. He had written the training manuals on de-escalation that this officer was currently ignoring. He knew that any physical resistance, even a flinch, would give Miller the justification to use force, a takedown, a taser, or worse. "Officer," Elias said, his tone shifting from instructional to warning, "you are about to cross a line you cannot uncross. I am giving you one last opportunity to walk back to your cruiser, run the license plate on that Ford F-150, and save yourself a lawsuit. Hands behind your back." Miller grabbed Elias's left wrist and twisted it. It was a sloppy maneuver. Elias trained in close quarters combat, and having subdued men twice his size in his prime, could have easily countered the grab. He could have pivoted, swept Miller's leg, and pinned him to the lawn in 3 seconds flat. But Elias knew the game. If he fought back, he became the aggressor. If he fought back, the narrative would shift to assault on an officer. So Elias let his arm go limp. He allowed the young officer to twist his arm behind his back. "I am complying," Elias stated loudly, ensuring the neighbor's phone across the street picked up the audio. "I am not resisting. I am stating clearly that this arrest is unlawful and lacks probable cause." "Stop tensing up," Miller yelled, though Elias was perfectly relaxed. It was a common tactic bad cops used to justify rough handling, shouting commands that contradicted reality. Miller shoved Elias forward, pressing him against the rough bark of the oak tree. "Spread your legs." Miller kicked Elias's feet apart. He slapped the cuffs on, ratcheting them too tight. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, resisting detention, and failure to identify." Miller reciting the charges he hoped would stick, the charges he hoped would cover up the fact that he had no actual crime to investigate. "Check the cuffs," Elias said. "They are restricting circulation. That is a policy violation." "They're fine," Miller grunted, grabbing Elias by the bicep and hauling him away from the tree. Mrs. Gable called out from her porch, her voice shaking. "Officer, that's Mr. Thorne. He's lived there for 20 years. What are you doing?" Miller whipped his head around. "Ma'am, step back inside. This is an active police scene." "He's pruning his roses," she yelled back. "He's the neighborhood watch captain." Miller ignored her. He marched Elias down the driveway toward the patrol car. Elias walked with dignity, his head high. He didn't look at his neighbors with shame. He looked at them with a nod of acknowledgement, specifically locking eyes with Marcus, who was filming. "Keep rolling his eyes," said. Miller opened the back door of the cruiser and shoved Elias inside. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. Elias had sat in the front of these cars for decades. Sitting in the back was a new, humiliating perspective. The cage was cramped. The smell of stale sweat and disinfectant was overwhelming. Miller slammed the door. He stood outside for a moment, breathing heavily, adjusting his uniform. He looked around the neighborhood. He saw the cell phones pointed at him. A seed of doubt began to sprout in his gut, a cold, heavy feeling. But he crushed it down. He was the law. The guy was uncooperative. He had to be hiding something. Miller got into the driver's seat. He didn't look at Elias in the rearview mirror. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch 1 Adam 12. 1 in custody, transporting to Central. 2, copy 1 Adam 12. Charges: obstruction, resisting." Elias sat silently in the back. He didn't ask for water. He didn't ask to be let go. He closed his eyes and began reviewing the civil rights statutes in his head, preparing his case. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a prosecutor building a file. The drive to the Central Precinct took 15 minutes. Not a single word was spoken inside the vehicle. Miller kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting the man to start begging or yelling or bargaining. That's what people usually did. They asked for a break. They apologized. But Elias Thorne was a statue. He stared out the window, watching the city he had sworn to protect pass by. He saw the corners where he had walked a beat in the 80s. He saw the park where he had organized community outreach programs. He was calm because he knew the storm that was about to break, and he wasn't the one who was going to get wet. Miller pulled into the secure sally port at the back of the station. The heavy steel doors rolled down behind them, sealing them inside. Miller exited the vehicle and opened the rear door. "Let's go," Miller said, grabbing Elias's arm again. Elias stepped out. His shoulders were stiff, his wrists burning from the tightness of the metal, but he didn't complain. He knew that every bruise was evidence. They walked through the heavy double doors into the intake processing area. This was the heart of the precinct. The smell of coffee ink and anxiety hung in the air. Several officers were at computers typing reports. A few arrestees were being fingerprinted. At the main booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Mac O'Malley. Mac was 55, a grizzled veteran with a mustache that looked like a push broom. He had been a patrol officer when Elias was a lieutenant. He had been a detective when Elias was captain. And he had been promoted to sergeant by Chief Elias Thorne himself 6 years ago. Mac was looking down at a file when the doors opened. "What you got, Miller, another shoplifter?" "No, Sarge," Miller said, puffing out his chest slightly. "Suspicious person in the hills. Refused ID, resisted detention. Bellicose non-compliance." "In the hills?" Mac looked up skeptical. "Who's the guy?" Miller stepped aside, revealing Elias Thorne. Time stopped. It wasn't a figure of speech. The bustle of the booking room literally ceased. A phone rang in the background and nobody answered it. An officer halfway through a sip of coffee lowered his mug slowly. Mac's face went from bored to ghostly pale in the span of a heartbeat. His eyes widened so much they looked like they might pop out of his head. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "Miller," Mac whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" I arrested him," Miller stammered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere but not understanding it. "He wouldn't identify himself. He was acting suspicious with a weapon." Mac walked around the desk. He didn't look at Miller. He walked straight to Elias. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Elias's face. "Chief," Mac said, his voice thick with disbelief. "Hello, Sergeant O'Malley," Elias said calmly. "I trust the family as well." Miller looked between them. "Chief, what do you mean, Chief?" Mac spun on his heel, his face turning a violent shade of red. He got inches from Miller's face. "You idiot. You absolute colossal moron. Do you know who this is? This is Elias Thorne, the retired chief of police, the man whose name is on the plaque in the lobby you walk past every single day." Miller's stomach dropped out of his body. The blood drained from his face, leaving him dizzy. He looked at the man in the dirty polo shirt, the man he had shoved against a tree. I didn't know," Miller whispered. "Uncuff him," Mac roared. "Right now." "No," Elias said. His voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Leave them on." Mac stopped. Miller froze. "Sir?" Mac asked. "I said leave them on, Sergeant. I want the current chief to see me exactly like this. I want him to see what his officers are doing to the citizens of this city. Call Chief Reynolds. Tell him I'm in holding." The next 10 minutes were the longest of Officer Kyle Miller's life. He was ordered to sit in a plastic chair in the corner of the booking room like a child in timeout. No one spoke to him. The other officers in the room, men and women he worked with, joked with, wouldn't even look at him. They gave him a wide berth as if his incompetence was contagious. Elias sat on the metal bench near the booking desk. He refused water. He refused to have the cuffs loosened. He sat in silence, a living monument to the department's failure. Sergeant O'Malley was on the phone, his voice hushed and urgent. He hung up and wiped sweat from his forehead. "He's on his way down, sir. He was in a budget meeting upstairs." "Thank you, Mac." Elias nodded. The double doors to the administrative elevators flew open with a bang. Chief of Police Marcus Reynolds stormed in. Reynolds was 45, sharp, political, and a protege of Elias. He was wearing a tailored suit, his badge clipped to his belt. He took one look at the scene, his mentor, the legendary Elias Thorne, sitting in handcuffs next to a terrified-looking rookie, and let out a curse word that wasn't appropriate for mixed company. Reynolds marched over to Elias. "Keys," he barked at O'Malley. O'Malley handed over the handcuff key. Reynolds personally unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked and the ratchets released. Elias brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. Deep red indentations were visible on his dark skin. "Elias, I don't even know what to say," Reynolds said, looking at the marks. "Are you injured? Do you need a medic?" I'm fine, Marcus, Elias said, standing up. He was 3 inches taller than Reynolds, and despite his age, he still commanded the room. But we have a problem. Reynolds turned slowly to face Miller. The rookie shrank back into his chair. Officer Miller, Reynolds said, his voice dangerously low. My office now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not pass go. Get in my office. Miller scrambled up and practically ran toward the elevators. Reynolds turned back to Elias. I can't apologize enough. We'll expunge this immediately. The arrest never happened. I'll drive you home myself. No, Marcus, Elias said. He reached into his back pocket, a movement that would have made Miller draw his gun an hour ago, and pulled out a small notepad. The arrest did happen, and it's going to stay on the record. Because if you erase it, you erase the evidence of what that officer did. And if he did it to me, he's done it to others who didn't have my rank. Elias, please. We can handle this internally. We will handle it legally, Elias corrected. I want copies of the body cam footage, the dash cam footage, and the dispatch logs. I'm filing a formal complaint, and then I'm filing a lawsuit. Not for the money, but because that boy in there thinks a black man in a nice house is a criminal. And until you fix that, you haven't fixed anything. Elias looked around the room at the other officers. You all know me. You know I support this badge. But the badge is heavy. If you aren't strong enough to carry it with integrity, you have no business wearing it. Miller isn't strong enough. Elias was released from custody at 4:30 p.m. He took an Uber home, refusing the chief's offer of a ride. He wanted to return as a citizen, not a VIP. When he arrived home, the sun was beginning to set. The neighborhood was buzzing. Neighbors were outside talking. When Elias stepped out of the Uber, Marcus, the young man from across the street, ran over. Mr. Thorne, are you okay? I got the whole thing. I got it on video. I'm fine, son, Elias said. Did you post it? Not yet. I wanted to ask you first. Elias looked at his garden. The shears were still on the bench where he had left them. The gloves were still there. The only difference was the muddy boot prints Officer Miller had left in the flower bed. Post it, Elias said. Post it everywhere. By the next morning, the video had 5 million views. The title was simple, Rookie Cop Arrests Retired Police Chief for Gardening. The internet exploded. The contrast was too perfect, too damning. The calm, dignified older man, citing the law versus the aggressive, screaming young cop. The comments section was a firestorm of outrage. He treated a veteran like a criminal. Listen to how the man speaks. He knows the law better than the cop. This is what we talk about when we say racial profiling is real. The media descended on the neighborhood. News vans parked along the street. Elias gave one press conference standing on his front lawn, right where the arrest happened. I spent 30 years in uniform, Elias told the cameras. I believe in law and order, but order without justice is tyranny. Officer Miller didn't see a citizen. He didn't see a veteran. He saw a stereotype, and because of that, he violated the Constitution he swore to uphold. If he can do this to a retired chief of police, imagine what he is doing to a 19-year-old kid walking home from work. The internal investigation was swift, mostly because Elias had already done the work for them. In his lawsuit filed 3 days later, Elias's lawyer requested the stop and frisk data for Officer Miller's entire 6-month career. The data was horrifying. In 6 months, Miller had initiated 42 stops. 38 of them were people of color. 35 of those stops happened in affluent neighborhoods. In every single case, the probable cause was listed as suspicious behavior or matches description of suspect. Miller was hunting. He was patrolling these neighborhoods, acting as a gatekeeper, deciding who belonged and who didn't. The Department of Justice took notice. The video was too viral, the victim too high profile to ignore. An independent audit of the department was ordered. Officer Miller was placed on unpaid leave, then fired 4 weeks later. The termination letter cited gross misconduct, violation of civil rights, and conduct unbecoming. Miller tried to fight it through the union. He claimed he was afraid for his life. He claimed Elias was posturing. But during the arbitration hearing, Elias took the stand. He didn't raise his voice. He simply dismantled Miller's defense piece by piece. "You said you feared for your life," Elias said to Miller across the table. "Yet my hands were open. My tools were on the bench. I was quoting case law. Tell me, officer, which Supreme Court citation frightened you? Was it Terry v. Ohio, or was it Florida versus Jardines?" Miller had no answer. He sat in sullen silence, realizing too late that he had picked a fight with a master of the game. The city settled Elias's lawsuit for $900,000. It was a staggering amount for a wrongful arrest case involving no major physical injuries. But the city attorneys knew that if this went to a jury with Elias Thorne on the stand, the verdict would be in the millions. Elias didn't keep a dime. He established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal representation for citizens wrongfully detained for suspicious person calls. But the biggest change wasn't the money. It was the Thorne Doctrine. The department implemented a new mandatory training policy. Every rookie officer was required to undergo 40 hours of specific training on the Fourth Amendment, specifically regarding private property and curtilage. They had to watch the video of Miller arresting Elias. They had to dissect it, frame by frame. 6 months later, the neighborhood was quiet again. The news vans were gone. The viral fame had faded, as internet fame always does. But the impact remained. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Elias Thorne was in his front yard. The roses were in full bloom, vibrant reds and pinks exploding against the green backdrop. He was holding his shears, pruning the dead weight to let the new growth thrive. A patrol car rolled down the street. It slowed down. Elias straightened up, watching it. The car stopped. The window rolled down. It was a young officer, a woman this time. She looked nervous. "Afternoon, Chief," she called out respectfully. Elias looked at her. He saw the hesitation, but he also saw the respect. He saw that she had checked the license plate. He saw that she knew who lived there. "Good afternoon, officer," Elias replied. "Stay safe out there." "You too, sir." She rolled up the window and drove on. Elias watched her go. He went back to his roses. He snipped a dead branch, watching it fall to the earth. It takes constant work to keep a garden healthy. You have to weed out the invasive roots. You have to prune the rot before it spreads to the whole bush. Policing was no different. It required constant vigilance, constant pruning. He had removed one bad root, but he knew there were always more weeds. He took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling the sun on his face. He was tired, but he was at peace. He had held the line one last time. This story reminds us that authority without accountability is dangerous, and that true patriotism means holding power to the highest standard. Elias Thorne didn't fight back with fists. He fought back with the truth. What would you have done if you were in Elias's shoes? Would you have been able to stay that calm? And do you think the settlement was enough for the humiliation he endured? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it and subscribe. We need to keep telling these stories until the system changes for good.